The scream ripped through the stillness of the apartment, echoing like a blade against glass. Emily clutched Daniel tightly, her arms trembling as she tried to shield him from the chaos. Mark shouted words laced with betrayal before storming out. The slam of the door reverberated through the walls like thunder, rattling dishes in the sink and shaking Emily's already fragile world. She whispered to Daniel, "I've got you," though her voice quivered with fear she could not mask. Outside, the sound of distant sirens bled into the silence, a haunting reminder of the world's indifference. In that moment, the life she had pieced together through sacrifice and relentless effort felt like it was shattering. Every memory of late nights, every dollar stretched thin, every dream put on hold pressed down on her chest. She knew nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after Mark's departure was heavier than his shouting. Emily stood still, her chest rising and falling as if every breath was a battle. The neighbors' muffled whispers seeped through thin walls, judgment hidden in their tones, though no words were distinct. Emily's heart pounded louder than the city noise outside. She told Daniel softly, "We're safe now," even though doubt hollowed her chest. The boy's small hands clutched her sweater as if it were his lifeline, refusing to let go. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee and damp walls, a reminder of the struggle she lived daily. She knew the world would keep watching, waiting for her to fail, but she refused to let them see her collapse. Her voice broke in the quiet, yet she whispered again with more force, "We're safe now, I promise." Emily rocked Daniel gently, her arms aching but unrelenting. She forced a smile, though her lips quivered. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, but the words felt fragile. Daniel looked up at her, eyes glistening, his voice small. "Will he come back?" The question pierced her like a blade. She stroked his hair, unable to answer honestly, but said, "Not tonight." The silence pressed harder, filling every corner of the room. Emily's gaze wandered to the cracked paint on the wall, each flake a reminder of broken promises. Her heart swelled with guilt for not shielding Daniel from this life. Yet in his eyes she found strength she didn't know she had. In that fragile moment she vowed silently that nothing, not Mark, not fear, not poverty, would take Daniel's safety from her again. Hours passed like minutes. Emily lay awake on the couch with Daniel asleep on her chest, his steady breathing the only anchor holding her together. Shadows from headlights outside crawled across the ceiling, tracing fleeting patterns of unrest. Her mind replayed every word Mark spat at her, every slam of his fist on the table, every threat hanging in the air. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, yet she dared not show it. She whispered into the darkness, "You deserve better, my love," brushing Daniel's hair back tenderly. Memories of double shifts, overdue bills, and empty cupboards surfaced, each one a badge of her sacrifice. Yet tonight's wound cut deeper. Betrayal had left her raw. As she closed her eyes, she knew tomorrow's battles awaited. But tonight her only mission was to guard the fragile peace of Daniel's sleep. By morning, the weight of the night lingered like a bruise. Emily stood at the small kitchen counter, staring at the chipped mug in her hand. Steam rose from stale coffee, curling like ghosts of forgotten dreams. She thought of the years she carried this life alone, jobs that drained her, nights without sleep, moments when food barely stretched enough for Daniel. "Every tear was worth it," she whispered, though her throat tightened with regret. She turned to see Daniel still sleeping on the couch, his small frame wrapped in a blanket too thin for the cold. Love surged through her like fire. She remembered each choice that led here, choosing him over everything else, every time. Her sacrifices were countless, but they were also her pride. Tonight's betrayal cut deep, but it also reminded her of the one truth she could never let go. Daniel was her reason. Emily faced Mark across the small lawyer's office, the air thick with hostility. Mark leaned forward, his tone venomous as he demanded custody of Daniel, his eyes burning with vindication. Emily's heart pounded, but she refused to look away. She said firmly, "Daniel belongs with me," her voice steady though her palms sweated. The lawyer shifted uneasily, caught between two lives unraveling. Emily remembered the nights of working double shifts, Daniel waiting for her with sleepy eyes, sacrifices Mark never saw. Mark sneered, twisting his words to make her sound unfit, throwing her struggles back as weapons. She clenched her fists under the table, silent tears threatening but never falling. Inside, she felt her strength bend but not break. For Daniel, she would not falter. The battle had begun, and she knew this was only the first strike in a war that would test her soul. Later that evening, Emily opened her door to find her best friend Sarah waiting. Sarah, usually a comfort, carried an expression Emily had never seen, something heavy and concealed. "I should have told you earlier," Sarah admitted, voice low. Emily's chest tightened, dread rising as Sarah confessed she had known Mark was planning to challenge custody for months. Betrayal sliced deeper than any wound Mark inflicted. Emily staggered back, Daniel asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware. Emily whispered, "How could you keep this from me?" Her voice cracked under the weight of hurt. Sarah's eyes brimmed with regret, but Emily could not find solace in them. For Emily, trust had been scarce, and now it felt shattered once more. She pressed her hand against the wall for balance, every piece of her world seeming to collapse in waves. The next morning, Emily sat at her desk in the bustling office, the hum of phones and chatter blending into an oppressive noise. Her supervisor, Mr. Harris, stood towering, his tone sharp as he hinted at her declining performance. "We need reliability," he warned, implying her job was at risk. Emily's stomach twisted, the paycheck was already stretched thin, and without it she would lose everything. She forced a nod, swallowing words of desperation. Around her, coworkers laughed lightly, oblivious to her turmoil. She stared at the computer screen, its glow blurring through tears she would not let fall. Daniel's small smile flashed in her mind, giving her the strength to keep steady. Though her body trembled, her voice remained firm. "I'll do better." Inside, however, she feared the ground beneath her was breaking apart piece by piece. That night, Emily sat on the edge of Daniel's bed, watching him breathe softly in his sleep. His small chest rose and fell, innocence untouched by the storms outside. She whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetheart," her voice breaking with guilt she could no longer contain. Daniel stirred lightly, but did not wake, his tiny hand clutching his blanket. Emily brushed his hair gently, remembering the laughter he once brought into every corner of her heart. Tonight, though, the weight of betrayal from Sarah and threats from Mark pressed hard against her chest. She wished she could shield him from every harsh truth. Her tears fell silently, landing on the blanket he clung to. She promised in her heart, "You'll never know how much I fight for you, but you'll always feel my love." The room, dim and warm, became her sanctuary of whispered vows. Days later, Emily met Mark again, this time in a public cafe filled with the clinking of cups and murmurs of strangers. Mark leaned back, smug, listing demands with calculated cruelty. He claimed Daniel deserved better, twisting truths into daggers. Emily sat rigid, her hands tight around a coffee cup, the heat biting her palms but grounding her. She said through clenched teeth, "You abandoned us, and now you want to play the hero?" Mark smirked, his silence more cutting than words. The cafe chatter faded in Emily's ears. All she heard was the pounding of her heart and Daniel's name echoing in her mind. Her jaw tightened, her resolve growing harder than ever. She realized Mark would fight dirty, but she would fight harder. Every sacrifice had led here, and she would not let him destroy what she had built. A thick envelope landed on Emily's doorstep with a hollow thud, the sound echoing in her chest. She opened it with trembling fingers and pulled out legal documents, words blurring as she read Mark's formal petition for custody. The letters burned into her eyes, each phrase questioning her ability as a mother. Emily sank into the couch, her pulse racing. Daniel's laughter from the next room stabbed her with contrast, innocence untouched by the storm about to break. She whispered, "They don't know me," though her voice cracked under pressure. Shadows lengthened across the room as daylight faded, her heart pounding louder than the city outside. Her sacrifices, her sleepless nights, every ounce of strength suddenly felt questioned on paper. Fear surged through her veins, but beneath it, anger simmered, daring her to rise. She knew this fight was only beginning. Later, Sarah sat across from Emily at the kitchen table, her voice urgent. You can't let him win, she said, her hands gripping a coffee mug like it might break. Emily stared into her friend's eyes, torn between anger and gratitude. Betrayal still lingered, but loyalty now shone through Sarah's worried face. Emily's own voice trembled. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Sarah leaned closer, her tone sharp yet filled with care. You've always been stronger than you think. The words sank deep into Emily's chest, stirring courage she thought she had lost. Daniel's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, reminding her of what was truly at stake. Emily's tears brimmed, but she nodded slowly. For Daniel, she would gather every fragment of strength. She knew Sarah's push was what she needed, even if her trust was cracked. The courtroom loomed like a fortress of judgment. Emily sat rigid at the table as the social worker, Ms. Turner, scanned her notes. We must evaluate stability, Miss Turner said coolly, her professional detachment slicing through Emily's nerves. Emily's palms pressed against the polished wood, grounding herself as she fought to keep her breathing steady. She thought of Daniel's smile, his small arms hugging her tightly at night. That love was her defense, stronger than any argument on paper. Mark sat smugly across the aisle, his smirk twisting like a knife. Emily whispered to herself, he doesn't know us, finding courage in the truth. The judge observed quietly, pen scratching on paper. Each moment stretched endlessly, the weight of authority pressing down like a storm. Emily's heart screamed in silence, but her eyes never wavered. She would not let them see her break. That night, Emily sat on the bathroom floor, back against cold tiles, muffling her sobs into a towel. Daniel knocked softly on the door, his small voice calling, Mom, are you okay? Emily wiped her tears quickly, pulling herself together. She forced a steady tone, I'm fine, sweetheart, go back to bed. His footsteps faded, leaving her in suffocating silence. She stared into the cracked mirror above the sink, seeing both exhaustion and resilience staring back. Every line on her face told a story of sacrifice. She clenched her fists, whispering to her reflection, I can't let him see me weak. Though her body trembled, her will burned bright inside. She stood slowly, straightening her shoulders, her eyes red but determined. Alone in the dim light, she rebuilt her mask of strength piece by piece, ready to face another day. Emily met Mark again in the parking lot outside the courthouse, tension thick as smoke. He leaned casually against his car, smirk plastered across his face. You're going to lose, he said coldly. Emily's jaw clenched, her voice low but fierce. I won't let you take him. Mark's eyes glinted with cruel confidence as he stepped closer, but Emily didn't back away. Her body shook, yet her stance remained firm. She felt Daniel's presence in her heart, fueling her courage. Cars passed behind them, headlights sweeping across the pavement, casting shifting light on their confrontation. Emily realized Mark thrived on intimidation, but she would no longer feed his power. She whispered firmly, You'll see who I really am. Her words, quiet yet burning, carried more strength than his sneer ever could. The war had only begun, but Emily had found her fire. The knock at Emily's door came late, long after she had tucked Daniel into bed. She hesitated, heart racing as she slowly turned the handle. On the other side stood a figure she hadn't seen in years, her older brother Michael, his face weathered but familiar. He had been gone since their childhood, a shadow from a painful past. Emily's breath caught, her voice barely a whisper. Michael? His eyes softened, yet carried guilt that weighed heavy. I should have come sooner, he admitted. Emily's chest ached as old wounds resurfaced, confusion blending with anger. Daniel stirred faintly in his room, unaware of the storm at the door. Emily stepped back, torn between shutting him out and pulling him inside. This moment, unexpected and raw, marked the return of a piece of her past she thought she had lost forever. Emily sat across from Michael at the small kitchen table, silence stretching between them. Michael's eyes searched hers, regret etched deep. I know I abandoned you, he said, his voice hoarse. Emily clenched her jaw, memories flooding back of nights she spent alone after their parents' neglect. She whispered bitterly, You left when I needed you most. Michael lowered his gaze, shame pressing his shoulders down. He reached for her hand, but Emily pulled back, unwilling to bridge the years so quickly. The hum of the refrigerator filled the void, the sound of a home she had built without him. Her anger clashed with the faint flicker of relief that he was here at all. Daniel's footsteps padded softly down the hall, reminding Emily that every choice now was about the child sleeping just beyond the doorway. Michael broke the silence with words Emily never expected. "I've been watching from afar," he confessed, his voice trembling. Emily's eyes narrowed, suspicion rising. "Why now?" she demanded, her tone sharp. He sighed heavily, explaining that he knew about Mark's custody battle, that he had connections which could help her. Emily recoiled, the weight of secrets pressing down. The brother who abandoned her was suddenly offering salvation. Her chest burned with distrust. "You think I can just forgive you because you show up now?" she snapped. Michael's eyes glistened with pain, but he didn't retreat. "I know I can't erase the past, but I can help you win this." The air between them thickened, her heart torn between rage and the desperate need for support. She looked away, her silence louder than words. Emily walked to the window, staring out at the street below. Her reflection in the glass seemed older, burdened by years of sacrifice. Behind her, Michael stood waiting, patient but anxious. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. Emily's arms crossed tightly, her back stiff with pride. She thought of every night she fought to survive without him, every moment she raised Daniel by herself. "You weren't there," she whispered, voice sharp as glass. Michael's silence filled the room, heavy with regret. For a moment, Emily closed her eyes, imagining what it would mean to finally have help. The thought frightened her, almost as much as the battle itself. Her pride fought her vulnerability, each pulling her in different directions. At last she turned, her expression conflicted but no longer closed. Finally, Michael stepped closer, his voice firm. "I can connect you with people who know the system, people who can fight back." Emily's breath caught, her body tense. Accepting his help meant exposing herself to a past she tried to bury. "And what's the cost?" she asked, suspicion lacing her tone. Michael looked down, guilt clear in the crease of his brow. "The cost is trusting me again," he answered quietly. Emily's heart twisted, her mind torn between distrust and desperation. For Daniel, she would swallow her pride, but the decision weighed like lead in her chest. She nodded faintly, not in forgiveness but in reluctant acceptance. The path ahead was darker than she imagined, but now she would not walk it alone. In that moment, her story shifted into dangerous and uncertain territory. The courtroom felt like a battlefield, every sound amplified by silence. Emily sat stiffly, her lawyer flipping through files with careful precision. Mark smirked across the aisle, his confidence filling the room like poison. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing as he surveyed both parties. Emily's hands trembled beneath the table, but her chin remained high. Daniel's small voice echoed in her heart, giving her strength. She whispered to herself, "I fight for him." Mark leaned forward, his words cold, as steel as he painted her as unstable and unfit. Each sentence stabbed at Emily, but she refused to flinch. Her lawyer's rebuttal rose sharp and steady, cutting holes in Mark's claims. Emily's heart pounded as truth clashed with lies, and she realized this was more than a hearing. It was war for Daniel's future. News of the case spread beyond the courtroom. Emily discovered Mark had twisted the story further, spreading lies among neighbors and online. In whispers at the grocery store and sideways glances at work, she felt the sting of judgment. Carrying a bag of groceries in one arm and Daniel's hand in the other, Emily whispered, "Ignore them," though her chest burned with humiliation. Daniel's confused eyes searched her face for answers she couldn't give. A once familiar neighborhood now felt hostile, shadows in every window. She lifted her chin, refusing to let the whispers break her stride. Beneath her calm, anger simmered, fueling her fight. She knew Mark's cruelty reached further than the courtroom, but she also knew her love for Daniel would stand louder than any lie. At home, Bills piled on the counter like mounting threats. Emily stared at them, her chest tightening. Rent overdue, utilities hanging by threads, groceries barely stretching through the week. She pressed her hands against the papers, whispering, "Not now, not when he needs me most." The weight of financial struggle pressed harder than ever. Her job felt fragile, her income stretched too thin to survive the storm of court fees. Daniel appeared at the doorway, his voice soft. "Are we okay, Mom?" She forced a smile, nodding despite the tears threatening to fall. He didn't need to see her weakness. Behind the smile, Emily made a silent vow. She would endure any sacrifice, even starvation if needed, to keep him safe. Money might break her body, but it would never break her will. Emily nearly collapsed under the weight of it all one evening, sitting on the couch with her face buried in her hands. The apartment felt smaller, walls closing in. Sarah entered, carrying takeout containers, her eyes soft with concern. "Eat something," she said, placing the food down. Emily shook her head, whispering, "I can't keep doing this." Sarah sat beside her, gripping her shoulder tightly. "You are not alone," she said firmly. Emily's tears finally fell, silent and unstoppable. For the first time in days, she leaned into her friend's embrace, allowing herself to be weak. Daniel peeked from the hallway, watching quietly, sensing the storm but feeling the safety of his mother's support system. Emily breathed deeply, finding comfort in Sarah's presence. Even in despair, she realized she was not entirely alone. The next morning, Emily stood in front of the mirror, her reflection worn but unbroken. She whispered, "I will fight," steady and sharp. The exhaustion in her eyes was undeniable, but behind it burned fire. Daniel's footsteps echoed behind her, his voice small but bright. "Ready, Mom?" She turned, forcing a smile that grew into something real. Taking his hand, she felt the weight of every sacrifice, every betrayal, every sleepless night. But she also felt her strength, raw and rising. The road ahead promised more battles, but she knew she could not yield. She bent down, kissing Daniel's forehead. "We're stronger than this," she whispered. His smile gave her more courage than any ally could. The world might strike again, but Emily was ready. For Daniel, for herself, she would never stop fighting. The courtroom air felt suffocating as Emily took the stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The lawyer asked her to describe her life as a mother. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke of nights spent working double shifts and mornings, waking early to make Daniel breakfast. She described the laughter that filled their tiny apartment and the sacrifices she carried with pride. Mark's lawyer leaned forward, ready to twist her words, but Emily met his eyes with quiet defiance. She said, "My son is my world, and I have given him everything I could." The judge's gaze lingered on her, searching for cracks, but she sat tall despite the tremors in her chest. The silence after her testimony felt endless, every heart in the room beating with the weight of her truth. Mark's turn came, and he stood confidently, projecting the image of a wronged father. His lawyer asked pointed questions, and he answered with practiced charm. "I only want what's best for Daniel," he declared, painting Emily as unstable and overwhelmed. Emily's fists clenched under the table, her body rigid with fury. She wanted to scream at his lies, but forced herself into silence, her lawyer's hand resting on her arm, a reminder to hold steady. Daniel's name rolled off Mark's tongue like a weapon. "Not a child." Emily whispered under her breath, "You don't deserve him." The room seemed to shift, the truth hanging like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Mark's words sounded polished, but Emily knew they were empty, and soon his mask would crack. The confrontation reached a breaking point during cross-examination. Emily's lawyer pressed Mark with relentless questions, exposing contradictions in his testimony. His confident tone faltered, his eyes darting nervously. Papers rustled as evidence surfaced, proof of missed visits, financial neglect, and reckless behavior. The gallery whispered, tension rippling like fire across the room. Emily sat still, her heart pounding, watching his facade unravel. Mark's voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. but the lies were too heavy to sustain. The judge's expression hardened, and for the first time Mark's smirk disappeared. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, strength rising in her chest. This moment was not victory yet, but it was the crack in Mark's armor she had been waiting for. The judge leaned back, folding his hands as silence descended. His voice carried weight as he summarized what had been heard, his words neutral yet heavy with judgment. Emily sat rigid, her heart racing so loudly she could barely hear him. Daniel's future balanced on every sentence, her breath caught in her throat. She glanced at her lawyer, who gave her a steady nod. Across the aisle, Mark shifted uneasily, his earlier confidence drained. Emily whispered, "Please," a prayer only she could hear. The judge's tone was measured, promising careful deliberation, yet every word felt like thunder in the still room. Time slowed to unbearable wait as Emily waited for his decision. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear had carried her here, to this single moment of reckoning. The final ruling echoed like a hammer strike. The judge declared custody in Emily's favor, but his voice carried the weight of conditions and scars that would not fade. Emily's chest surged with relief, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She turned to Daniel, sitting quietly in the gallery with Sarah, his small face lighting with joy. Emily whispered, "We did it," her voice breaking under the flood of emotion. Mark's face twisted, anger flashing, but his silence spoke louder than words. Emily felt the victory, but also the toll. It had cost her pieces of herself she would never recover. Yet in Daniel's smile, she found redemption. The courtroom faded around her, noise melting into stillness. She realized this was not the end, but the beginning of rebuilding a life scarred but not destroyed. Emily stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the verdict still pressing on her shoulders. Though she had won custody, victory felt fragile, more survival than triumph. The crowd outside buzzed with voices, but she focused only on Daniel's hand slipping into hers. He looked up at her with a smile so pure, it broke through the exhaustion in her chest. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "We made it, sweetheart." Sarah followed close behind, relief etched across her face. Emily exhaled deeply, a breath she had been holding for years. Yet inside, she knew scars would remain, memories that could never be erased. Still, holding Daniel's hand, she felt the power of resilience. The road ahead would be steep, but at last she had secured his future and their chance to begin again. The apartment felt quieter than ever when they returned home. Emily placed her purse on the counter, her movements slow, body drained from the endless fight. She watched Daniel settle onto the couch, wrapping himself in a blanket, his smile steady, but his eyes tired. Emily whispered, "It's finally over," though she knew deep down the battles of healing were still ahead. She touched the chipped wall with her fingers, remembering every sacrifice carved into this space. The weight of betrayal, judgment, and struggle lingered like shadows, but so did the strength that carried her here. She looked at Daniel, who now leaned against Sarah as she read him a story, and her heart softened. The world had bruised them, but love remained unbroken. That alone gave her hope. Later that night, Emily sat at Daniel's bedside, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. His small chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, his lips curled in the hint of a dream-born smile. She brushed back his hair and whispered, "You are my everything." Her eyes burned with tears, not of despair but release. The weight she carried for so long finally felt lighter. She thought of Mark, of lies and battles, but his shadow no longer ruled her. The apartment, worn and imperfect, became sacred in this quiet moment. She leaned down, kissing Daniel's forehead softly, vowing silently never to let anyone break them again. Outside, the night was still, the city a muted hum. Inside, Emily felt a fragile but undeniable peace settle over them both. Emily stood by the kitchen window the next morning, sunlight breaking through blinds, painting lines of gold across the walls. She sipped coffee from her chipped mug, the taste bitter yet grounding. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the world was collapsing. Instead, she saw a path, uneven but hers to walk. She whispered softly, "We're stronger now," testing the words as if they were new. Behind her, Daniel's laughter rang out as Sarah joked with him at the table, their voices bright. Emily turned, watching the scene unfold, her heart swelling. This was her victory, not the courtroom papers but the warmth of family stitched together by love. For a moment, the scars felt less sharp, replaced by something fragile yet unshakable: hope. That evening, Emily moved quietly through the apartment, checking Daniel's door before pausing. She pressed her hand gently against the wood, a silent promise. Opening it softly, she stepped inside to see him curled in sleep, his face calm under the glow of a nightlight. She sat down beside him, her heart swelling with love. A smile spread across her face, real, unburdened, unmasked. She whispered, "We're stronger now, and we'll never stop fighting." Her voice was soft, but it carried all the strength of her journey. The room filled with peace, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt free. Tomorrow would bring new trials, but tonight, she allowed herself to breathe. Victory wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For her and for Daniel, it was everything.